there's all the video shows everything, the timing, the angles, everything. So it involves rigging, position, slumping, not slumping, all that. So I just can't say enough for what Ken and Lachlan have provided to us. That's it.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a bit shocked. Thank you very much. What our goal really is to make the website a resource that covers everything to do with rowing that's important, and we want it to be out there and available. And it's interesting, the reason we started it in the first place, I came back from an Australian trip, and you may have seen the bio we put in before, but I talked to Lachlan about how do I get people to get a good resource for people to row, and I'll go and talk to the schools. And his comment was, we haven't got enough time to do that. You'll never get there. Let's video it and see what happens. And we did, and this is what happened. So it's interesting. But one of the critical things you mentioned there, Ned, is that it's really important to learn from everyone. And I really like going out with any coach, whether I think they know more than me or less. And every time I go out with a coach, I learn something. And I think that's what makes us as coaches, makes us pretty powerful. And as rowers, you've got to understand what you're doing, otherwise you can't do it correctly. So understanding is important.
Yeah, well, it was sort of our questions to start with about rowing that really got us into it. And we'd ask, the best coach we could find that was nearby. They give us some interesting answer, and it completely changed the way we thought about the sport. So it's one of those things that, so it's our questions basically just in a video format, trying to, sort of discover the secrets of, a good rowing stroke and a good rowing. So,
Yeah.
And we learn all the time, like with you may have seen the one I did recently on the swingulator for coaching athletes at school how to teach sweep. And I came up with that process of how to teach them because I was helping at the school with all of the age groups a bit, and they had all these new athletes that had no idea about how to sweep. So I thought, well, how can I teach this? And then we come up with a couple of ideas and film it and put it up. And as Lachlan says, it's really answering our own questions as much as anything. So if anyone's got any questions, please email them to us, because we're pretty keen to keep expanding the knowledge base.
Yeah, the question's the start. And if we have a question, then we can work it out or ask someone and work it out ourselves or whatever's necessary.
Nice. I noticed on the site that you have on-water and indoor rowing courses for coaches and athletes. And I was just curious if you guys could talk a little bit about the rowing training methodology that you use in these particular training programs. I mean, I'm just thrilled that you just make it so accessible to everybody.
So, Jessica, do you mean the program as in a time-based program, or you mean the actual course on
the two courses we've got? The ones we did before the coaches conference a couple of years back. We did. That came about because there's no. I work in the school, in one of the schools in my city, and the reason I work there is twofold: one, to make it better, and two, from my perspective, to understand the issues that they face in teaching athletes to row. And it's difficult when you've been coaching at elite level. You tend to assume awful lot of things. You tend to assume that everyone knows how that they have to let the blade on the water. If you've got blades flat on the water, you've got to let them move a little bit with the boat. And it actually never occurred to me until I was trying to coach some under 13 girls on how to row. And I thought, surely they know how to do that, because I've always assumed it. And so working with the school at the under 13 right the way through to the senior level, then I've found that there were these gaps in knowledge, and a lot of the coaches were actually parents. And parents are great coaches, and they don't mind coaching their own children and getting it wrong, because that's what parenting is about. But they don't like coaching other people's children and not doing it well. So that's where the courses came from. And I tried to, when we put them together, we tried to do them right from the basics through to a reasonably competent level. And so the indoor one is really designed to do first, because it's easier to get them to understand, if they can do it on an ergo, a lot of the items before they get on the water. And so that's where the courses came from. And I'd like to redo some of them, because we're getting better with our techniques and better with our video and all that. And so we like to keep redoing those to make them better.
Is there a specific thing you're thinking of, Jessica, in relation to them?
No, when I was just impressed by how thorough it all was. I just loved how you broke it down into individual segments that were I really appreciated that. Yeah, so.
I guess that's what we've always tried to do. We always knew that, reading a book is probably beyond this, the attention span of most people. So when we're trying to do a video, we try not to include too much in it on purpose. If we have a look at some of the best videos we've got is like an hour-and-a-half long conference session of a top Olympic coach talking. That you'd be surprised how few people actually view it. It's tiny. It doesn't get any of the respect it deserves. So that's probably one of the main reasons. A lot of the concepts in those videos, we try and break it down and make it a little bit more simple to understand and demonstrate where possible and things like that. But it's always trying, with the rowing courses especially, we tried to not assume any prior knowledge of the sport. It can be, when you're a rowing coach or in rowing, you don't realize the mammoth amount of information that separates a rower from someone who's never come into contact with the sport. So I mean, if we thought we were dumbing it down too much or making it too simple, we thought we might be on the right track with those ones especially, just because, it's just easy to assume knowledge when it's not there.
Right.
We also, with the videos too, we try to make it, one of the questions that you had before in your emails earlier, Jessica, was how do people use the website and how do masters in particular use the website? My experience has been that masters have a lot of trouble getting coaches because there's just not enough coaches around, full stop. And so the coaches who coach at schools are generally starting out as parents who don't know much about it, a lot of, especially the smaller schools. And masters have trouble getting coaches with experience because that's just the nature of it. Mm-hmm. So with the short videos, then the concept really is to focus on a particular aspect. For example, if you're focusing just on the catch, then we've got lots of videos on the catch. And the way to train yourself, because I'm a great believer that athletes can coach themselves. All they really need to do is firstly to understand why they're doing something and what the impact on the boat is. And if you don't understand that, then it's way too hard anyway. Mm-hmm. And so we try to educate that. And then what I suggest people do is video themselves or get someone to video them. And with a GoPro on the stick, it works really well by yourself, but you can get someone to film with a phone or a camera from the boat. And then analyze that yourself and look at that compared to what we say in the videos. And then very quickly you can understand what the issue is. And then hopefully one of our drills will be able to help them improve their technique. So I think there's a bit of a thought process that people don't coach themselves, they need a coach. And I think that's actually not true. I think if people understand what they're doing and then they try to then they film it and watch themselves, then they can analyze their own movements quite well. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we need to keep them short for that purpose, I think, too.
Yeah, I would agree. So one of the questions, and I believe Ned, when I asked Ned if he had anything he'd like sort of addressed, one of them was techniques to remedy missing water at the front end.
My favorite topic. You probably worked that
out.
Yeah, hands down, we've got the most videos out of anything is on this one question, like hundreds of videos just on this one thing.
That's a serious question. And it's I don't know which of the videos you've all seen, so forgive me if I'm talking about something you already know, but I consider that the catch is the most important part. And not because I'm not taking it away. If I talk to Lyle McCarthy, he'll say that the most important part is the finish, but he's really saying that's so you can get set up ready for the catch. And so in any event, how you put the blade in the water is a critical step, whether it's the beginning of the stroke or not. And a lot of things I think aren't understood. In fact, it took me a number of years to work out that the blade actually moves as it goes into the water. So as you put it in, it has to move because the boat's moving. And the concept of the blade going in really quick is not an instantaneous thing. Even with Joel in Finland recently, when we've been working on this, he can put the blade in about 0.09 of a second. And you say, well, that's pretty quick. how can you change something that takes 0.09 of a second?
Mhm.
And I'll give you an example of why you can, and this is really important, I think, is that the filming we were doing with his filming, he films on a GoPro and sends it to me, we're doing it at 60 frames a second. And it had backsplash there. And so I saw the backsplash and I said, well, let's have a look at it. And I watched his seat, and his seat moved 2 frames while he was putting the blade in the water, and he was still going forward, and that was his backsplash was. So I said, Joel, I need you to change something that takes a 30th of a second, because it's 2 frames at 60. You need to change that 30th of a second and change that movement. And we'd all look at it logically as humans and say, well, that's ridiculous. You can't even think about that. But you can change it, and you did. And it's about going forward, back a step and saying, well, what caused that in the first place, and make a small change. So you can make big changes. But even if the blade goes in 0.1 of a second, often it's 0.2, but that sort of time frame, then it'll move the seat about 4 centimetres, a couple of inches on the slide. And you have to let that happen. And what often happens is people row it in. Now, how do you learn to do that? And I think the easiest way to learn, if I interpret the question correctly, is, yes, we can do it on a swinger later, and you may have seen that footage of me pretending to be the water. But if you're doing it in a boat, it's actually really quite easy to teach. What you need to do is, let's assume you can do it in a single or a pair, but let's pick a bigger boat because it's easier. If you're in, say, a 4 or an 8 or a quad, then if you have half the crew, just balance the boat and row it along. And then all you want them to do is to put the blade in and separate the movement of the blade into the water from the leg drive. They're 2 separate movements. Yes, they're 0.2 of a second apart, but they're 2 separate movements. And get them to just put the blade in and let the water push them down the slide. And so they're not pushing at all, they're just putting the blade in, and the water will push, the oar will push them down the slide. So when they're pushed down the slide like that, that's the sensation they've got to get used to. Then when you come into the catch the next time, is get them to put the blade in the water and let it push them a little bit, and then have them push. And then gradually shorten that time frame until they put the blade in, feel the water push them, and then push. And what they're doing actually, when they get it right, is they're actually picking up the load. So they put the blade in the water, pick up the weight, pick up the load, and then accelerate it away. And so 2 things in relation to that I think are really important. The first one is, when they put it in, then they need to understand that if they put it in and they don't push early enough, then the handle will kick in their hand. It will push against them, so they'll feel it. So that's really important thing for them to understand, because then they can check whether they've got their catch right anytime. Without telling anybody, they can be rowing along in a race, and they can say, this next stroke, I'm going to delay my leg drive just a fraction. And if I don't feel the handle kick in my hand, I've been pushing too early anyway.
Right.
So then they can correct themselves without upsetting the boat at all. So they need to understand that part of it. The other thing that's really important too, particularly in a small boat like a single, is that Lachlan summed it up really well once in one of the videos, that rowing is like pushing a car. And so you can't push a car really hard, really quickly. You've got to get it moving a bit faster, a bit faster, a bit faster, and a bit faster. And one of the things I found with Joel when I started coaching him about 4 months ago is that he was putting the blade in, and as soon as it was near the water, he was giving it everything he could. And so he was getting really worn out, because it's like pushing a wall. You just exhaust yourself and go nowhere. And so you have to accelerate it. So you got to pick it up, pick up the load, and then accelerate it right the way through to the finish. And so the easy way to teach it in a boat, if you're in a bigger boat, is to have people sit out and just keep the boat balanced. Have the athletes get used to the feeling of being pushed by the oar, and then ask them to then put the blade in and then pick up the load, and then gradually move it more together so that they get that separation, and put the blade in and then push. It's interesting how quickly athletes will pick that up. And you can do it in a single. It's just in a single, they row for a few strokes, put the oar in the water, let it push them down the slide, and get to understand it and repeat that. And I find it works really well with the kids understanding it. If I'm coaching school kids, any age school kid will understand that if the boat's moving and you put something in the water, it's going to have to move. And what often happens, I hear people say, put the blade in as you're coming forward. Now that's not really true, because that physically can't happen. If you put the blade in while you're going forward, you're going to check the boat. So it doesn't happen. But you have to actually think about it before they're coming into the catch, and put the blade in and then wait. And I think it's better described by giving them example, making them row for a while, put the blade in, let the blade push them, and get them to understand that that has to happen. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's critical with the catch, and I get annoyed a little bit, annoyed's the wrong word, I just don't agree with people sometimes, when they say that we want to have the blade just in the water. If the blade's just in the water, then what happens is that when you start to push, it's going to move through the water. Mm-hmm. You really want the blade connected. It's got to be in, it's got to be deep.
Right.
And when I talked to Lyle McCarthy about this, he said, of course it's got to be deep. If it's not deep, then you're just pushing water, aren't you? And if you put the blade in deep, and by deep I mean you can't see the blade, it's under the water. And the water's probably 30 centimetres up the shaft. So it's quite deep. The trick is you don't want it to go up and down through the stroke. But if you put it in deep and you get really solidly connected, then the blade doesn't really move through the water. The boat goes past the blade, which of course everyone's been telling people for years. And it actually happens. But if you've got the blade shallow, it's not quite so effective. Mm-hmm. So put it in and put it in deep, and then push. And that's the secret. Hope that makes sense.
That was wonderful. Yeah.
Pleasure.
I mean, it's funny. For years, I used to run rivers, and it reminds me of some of the same sensations that I experienced there, because you sort of had to connect with the water to control the boat in the water.
Yeah.
A little bit different.
Yeah. And if someone's got a light catch, it feels light, they've missed it. Mm-hmm. If it feels light at the catch, you didn't get there. It's you've got it wrong. And so heavy catch is good. Yeah. Be careful a little bit. If you put the blade in and it's well connected, then it's going to be a lot heavier at that point. So you want to make sure that everyone's got the weight at the same time. Perhaps, Lachlan, can you talk on the way that rowing is, if you're not aiming to be super, super fast, how to take the catch?
I think I might just do the one before. So if you're having trouble getting the blade into catch or missing water, the catch is all about timing, and so the more strokes you take, the easier it should be to pick that timing. The real critical thing is to think about how you're placing the blade and not just blindly row along. But another thing that I do to make the catch a bit easier is to move the foot stretcher forward, basically as far forward as you can, towards the stern of the boat I'm talking about, as you can, and have a handle position that isn't too tight. You don't want to be like really tight, but quite tight. It'll feel a bit uncomfortable. But what that does is when you get to the catch, you're at a bigger angle, so you can place the blade a lot easier, and you have a lot more time to put the blade in the water. So if you imagine the foot stretcher back towards the bow a bit, you don't get on such a big angle, and in relation, the water's moving a lot quicker than to the blade. So if you come round further, you get a lot more time to place it. And so that might be a good way just to get a bit better feeling if you're having struggling to get the catch in. Give yourself a bit more catch angle, and then you'll have a bit more time to get that placement. If you've got a lot of room around the finish and your feet are towards the bow of the boat, you have to be a lot quicker, and it's a lot more difficult. What was the second thing you wanted to ask, Ken? If you're rowing for just for fun as opposed to racing.
Yeah, because one of the things that comes from what Lachlan has just said there about if you put the blade in a long way around at the catch, yes, it's easy to go in, and it's also important to remember that the blade doesn't actually drop into the water. It spears into the water. I don't know if you've seen a recent video I did of Joel going under a bridge, and the blade clearly doesn't go straight down into the water. It goes in like the bow of a boat. And so what Lachlan's saying is it's a lot easier. But Lachlan, can you perhaps expand on what it does to the weight, to the gearing of the boat?
So it makes the catch a lot heavier. So the bigger the catch angle, so the further forward you come and further around the blade goes, the heavier it is. So all the way around here is a lot heavier than here. And it's an exponential relationship, at a point. So it's going to be a lot heavier, but that also means you have a lot more time. So, people might say, well, it's really heavy at the catch. That's only if you push really hard at the catch. So if you're just rowing along and you enjoy rowing relatively slowly, which I do most of the time, I enjoy, like the slow sort of flowing movement of it. You have time to place the blade. You can be very relaxed about when you put the power on, and you've got a lot of time to get that good feeling. And it means you can pick up the water too without ripping at it. So you don't want to be ripping at the water, getting like air caught behind and just shooting the oar through. You want to get nice and deep, slowly apply the power. Slowly, I mean maybe the first quarter of the slide. You want to be relatively slow applying the power. You get a really good lock on. The blade's under the water. You haven't caught any air, and you can just pull through to the finish with constant pressure. And it doesn't have to be a lot. If you're racing, if you're someone who's into racing, you really want to be getting that blade in and buried, and then the legs on as hard as possible, the body opening up hard, the finish hard. Like it's extraordinarily stressful on the body. But if you're a bit more relaxed about it, and you can still be a fast rower, rowing in a relaxed fashion, I just take a little bit more time around the catch, focus on getting the placement at the right time. Don't worry too much about like banging the legs on or opening the body up. Just place and then just a squeeze through to the finish, and you can still work relatively hard like that. It's just a slight shift between trying to go as hard as possible, putting a lot of strain on the body, to just building up the stroke slowly and sort of thinking from 0%. One of my coaches at school said you want to do like 0% at the catch through to 100% at the finish. I mean, obviously he didn't quite mean that exactly, but the message was just build throughout the stroke. Don't try and do anything, as Ned was saying, against the water. You want to be sort of working with it and using it to lever the boat past. And I think a lot of people get really stressed at the catch, and that's because we're always focusing on it. But if you give yourself a bit more catch angle and take your time and think about placing the blade before you push, not worried about getting on too quick and being real busy with it. I think you can have a really nice relaxing row, and you still move fast, and you can still move the boat quite quickly that way. Whether or not it will win your world championship is probably unlikely, but I think you'll get a lot more enjoyment out of your rowing. And I know I do, just making that small change.
That's great.
It's one of those interesting things. We started out essentially talking about how to make a boat go fast. But the reality is a lot of people aren't that interested in making a boat go fast. They just want to go for a nice row and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And so that's where Lachlan's saying, give yourself more of that and you enjoy it more.
Mm-hmm. There's a ton of overlap. There's a heap of overlap, but there's some things that really don't work well with the two groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing with it too, if you're coaching children, or in fact anyone, if you're coaching anyone and they have back issues, then one of the things that you need to remember is that, as Lachlan says, that the catch, the gearing is exponentially more round towards the front. It can be as much as 12 times the heavier than it is perpendicular to the boat. So that's a massive difference. And you'll sometimes find with crews, particularly you see this in schools where some of the young kids get sore backs and all those sorts of issues. And if you get someone who's got a sore back, then a couple of things you can do to fix it really easily, or to help fix it. First one would be to do exactly the opposite of what Lachlan's saying, but for this reason, is move the foot stretcher towards the bow, because that reduces the gearing at the catch. Now, it makes the catch harder to get in well, but it does reduce the load on the body quite a lot. And also, people that are in that position with that sore back issue, quite often it's because they've got the whole boat. I was coaching Joel recently in a double, and for when we first set it up, the setup of the boat was such that he had his blade in the water earlier and at a greater angle than the guy in the stroke seat, and therefore when they finished, he came out last. So he had the weight of the boat more than the stroke person for the whole stroke. Right. And so if you've got someone with a bad back, it may well simply be that their angle is wrong.
Right.
And they're doing all the work. So with angles, just be mindful that when it is around the catch and they are putting the weight on, if it's a steep angle catch, then they've got up to about 12 times the weight of it is just perpendicular. So people with bad backs, I just ease it up a little bit, and the simplest thing is just move their foot stretcher towards the bow.
Okay, cool.
And get them to not attack the catch too hard.
Cool. So you ready for another question?
Go for it. I can go all day.
Okay, yes. So could you discuss the release? So this is another one of Ned's questions. Rowers doing too much layback with not enough core support, so slouching.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's critical, I think. Core. The trouble with a weak core is that it overloads your back. So it has all sorts of flow-on effects that can cause injuries and the like. So a strong core is critical in rowing, of course. The thing about a strong core too is if you get to the finish and then you slump, then you're in a weak position.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, if I'm trying to make a boat go fast, again, if you're just going for a comfy row, by all means go for a comfy row. But I think it's really important to keep the pelvis vertical at all times, as vertical as you can. And if you've got the pelvis vertical, then you won't slump. And what happens is, if you slump, then you're putting all that weight into the bow of the boat. And if you've got a 80 kilogram person who's rowing and they put their whole body put downward pressure into the bow of the boat at the finish, then that's a lot of weight that's sitting in the boat. And it just slows it down. As Ned pointed out with that footage of Joel, particularly heading into a headwind, that piece where he was finishing a little early with his hands. And I didn't put up at the end of that was when he said, well, I know exactly what I'm going to be racing if I've got a headwind, but that's so much easier. Mm-hmm. And so leaning down into the bow, leaning back into the bow, if you're a lightweight rower, and I've had a lot of experience coaching elite lightweight women athletes, and sometimes because of their stature, they really need to get as much length as they can. So if someone's relatively short, then you need to be careful that you don't make them sit up too tall because they'll sacrifice too much length at the finish. So they have to tend to lean back a little further. Mm-hmm. But with normal, that's a really shocking word, isn't it? With larger people, heavyweight athletes, if you like, then if they're leaning back into the boat, then that's a lot of weight in the bow. Reality is that as long as the oar in a sculling gets around to about 44 degrees, well, that's plenty. You don't need any more than that. So 66 at the catch, 44 at the finish. That's as much as you're going to want to hunt for. And so when they pull it past their body, that's a really weak position anyway. And so they're not getting a lot of power at that point. They're only using their arms. It's out the side of their body. It's not really worth it. And the thing that's really important is that leaning back into the boat, you say, well, that's not a big issue. The boat can handle it if it's a big enough boat. Pulling it past your body, well, yes, it's a weak position, but we're at the finish, so what does it matter? It takes a long time. If you pull your hand, if you're going to finish just at the front of your body compared to finishing at your side, by the time you pull that oar through, feather it and get it back to that point, if you want to take your rating up from the difference in rating that takes is very significant. And so if you want to be able to rate in a race at say 35, and you're pulling it way past your body, that's so hard to do. Whereas if you finish just at your body, it's so easy to do because you lose, I did work it out on one of the videos, I think you lose a couple of seconds in that part of it, which is very significant. So I think it should be avoided unless you need it for the length. But if you can get 44 degrees in a sculling boat at the finish, you don't want any more anyway.
I think a lot of the time when people lean back at the finish, it's because they haven't done a very good job at the catch. So they're trying to make up for it at the finish. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the time, if you see someone who's leaning back a long way, try and fix their catch in their early drive phase. Because if you get a good catch, good drive phase with the body and opening up, the arms are just sort of finishing off. They're sort of just making up the numbers, really. They're not very strong muscles and they can't do much for your boat speed. Some people who do have a very lay back style, like maybe some of the older Canadian 8s, things like that, they laid back a long way, but they weren't they were making the most of that. Most people who move past the vertical lay back they're not driving, they're not strong, they don't have backs that are 2 feet wide. They're really just wasting their time. I think if you can get it all done, most of it done with the catch and the early leg drive and the body opening, the hands are really just trying to be nice and clean and quick. And then, just think about stopping it off short. Because as Ken said, you dip down into the bow, and that's one thing. But by the time you get to here, like, you're pretty much done. Like, you're not, it's the bit that speeds the boat up the most during the drive phase, because it's like the last little bit, but it's really quite ineffective. It's, if you look at an acceleration curve, it sort of goes up like this, and then it comes down, and this is the finish bit where it's coming back down to the, it's if you line it up with the footage, it's bugger all that's been done with the last little bit of the stroke. And so you might as well chop it off, what some people would call early, but I don't think it's that effective. And it's really, you do get used to rowing with a laid back style, but if you start rowing a bit more upright, before you know it, you won't even think about it. It's not like, you might think, oh, I need to lay it back to make it feel right. It's just about shifting your focus to the catch as opposed to the finish.
Yeah. So what about drills and workouts to assist in, many of our masters are transitioning from sweep to single sculling. And if you had some suggestions for some drills or workouts to assist them in that. Again, you're laughing.
I think that the couple of critical things, I suppose. First one is that they're not very dissimilar. They're pretty much the same. And the way sweep rowing is coached these days too is that you don't lean out of the boat. You just pivot right around your torso. And so there's really not much difference. The posture, positions are pretty much the same. Everything's the same. I think the first thing that they should try to learn is how to feather. It's interesting, I asked Lyle McCarthy a few years ago, I said, what's the most important thing you should teach an athlete? I said, a beginner athlete. And he said, the most important thing you could teach any athlete is grip. And I was a bit surprised by his answer, actually, because it sounds like a really simple thing. But what happens is that if you don't know how to feather the oar properly and you've got a tight grip, then you're not going to be able to do things well. If you've got a tight grip, that means you've got a tight shoulder. I suggest clench your fist really tight and see if you can relax your shoulder, and it's almost impossible. And so you have to have tight shoulders if you've got a tight grip. And if you've got a tight grip, it's hard to do small movements really well. If you've got a loose grip, it's easy to do small movements. So if you want to have a precise, good catch, then you want to have a relaxed grip to be able to do that. The reason I talk about feathering so much is that, back to the previous question about people slumping in the boat, often people slump in the boat simply because they can't feather. And so they drop their wrist down and their shoulder goes down and their body goes down. It all just happens together. And feathering is, once you've learnt to do it incorrectly, it's very difficult to change, so hard to change. And if you learn it correctly, then it's so easy to change. We've got lots of videos on how to feather, but essentially you just want to roll your fingers out. And if they get that bit right, then I think you'll find everything else is pretty much the same between sculling and sweep.
I think there's one big thing you missed as a coach there, Ken. It's the fear. The fear is the biggest difference between sweep rowing and single sculling.
Right.
Yeah, well, I'm in an aluminium boat with a motor on the back, so I'm not too concerned about the fear.
Yeah, so it's like, when I first started in single sculls at school, so I was lucky, but I fell in like 4 times, something like that. If you're going out in single scull, there's no two ways about it. You have to be able to get yourself back into that single scull, unless you're going out with a coach. I mean, sometimes I go out without a coach, but if you're learning, obviously you'll need a coach to help you get back in that boat. But once you've fallen in and you can get back in the single, that takes a lot of the stress out. It's a time thing. It's quite natural to be really nervous in a single, especially around the catch, when you first get into it, and you will have some bad strokes and you'll almost go swimming sometimes, and sometimes you might go swimming. But you just have to be like, well, people enjoy their single scull rowing all the time. I can become that person because they were once what I am now. I'd recommend just getting in and just going for rows and rows and rows, and don't worry if you feel like you're going to fall in or whatever, you'll just get used to it. Everyone goes through it.
Yeah. The other thing that's important in that, and Lachlan's quite right, is that if you can start them in a boat that's bigger, like start in a quad and have the boat stable, I think there's too much emphasis on trying to balance the boat and get that bit right, because it's really difficult to learn how to do the catch properly if you're afraid you're going to fall in. And so, a bit like Ned was saying before, if you practice the lazy feather, then that'll give you you can feel confident at the catch with a lazy feather because you blade's flat on the water. And so I'd suggest that as a drill. But then when you start to row with your blades off the water, first thing is don't be in a hurry to do it. Do it for quite a while with the blades on the water and the lazy feather type drill, because that makes it easy for you to get confidence. And the other critical thing is that I think without a balanced boat in sculling, it's really difficult to do a good catch, because you just want to get out of that front position. And so the more you can make the boat stable, the better. If you've got wide boats in the club, I tend to use a wide boat and get used to it in a wide boat. Get used to it in a scull. If you have them, then you could put some para pontoons on the riggers and balance the boat that way and practice it. Because
or tape some big bottles to it.
Yep. Pepsi bottles, something like
bottles, like just duct tape them under the riggers.
Yeah. It might look silly, but it works.
Hey, so there was one question came up. Mocha, I'm not clear on your question. If you want to unmute and ask your question, that'd be great.
Oh, you're going to make me do that.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
So I don't know the right terminology because I suck at that. So when you start rolling your blades for the catch, I think a lot of people will say, oh, start rolling after you pass the knees, start rolling. But sometimes you might roll with people who just kind of rolls feathers at the last minute right before the catch, and it seems to work for them too. So what, did that make sense, the question?
Yeah, so the number one thing, and if you're rowing with someone else you're following them, so they're in the stroke seat, you row like they row. And if the coach tells you you're going to row some other way, then you both try and do that. But when you're rowing along, yes, it's good to square up early. If you're talking about like best practice, you want to probably be square around 3/4 slide so you can place the blade. I learned relatively early on that I like squaring up just before the catch, because I hate it if like a wind catches it, or when I've got square blades. And as you know, if you row a single, you're quite scared of rowing with square blades because you could catch the water and it will upset the balance and things like that. So I've developed a habit that's quite, probably a bad habit, squaring up quite late, as you were saying. And it does work, and it depends what your goals are. If you're rowing a crew, your goal should be to all row the same. If you're rowing a single, you can do whatever you like. Best practice is probably around the 3/4 slide mark, be square and ready to place. It can make the placement a lot easier. And the worst thing you want to do, it doesn't matter if you square up late, but you don't want to be sort of squaring up with your blade on the water. So if this is the water, you don't want to be lifting it up to place it in. You can square up late like this, or you can square up early and place, but you don't want to be along the water up and then place. So yeah, the key is to place into the water like that, not place like that. And you can square up early. Sometimes it makes it easier, and place. But yeah, the real key is placing it at the right moment, at the furthest point, and not wasting water or time by, sort of knifing it into the water or backsplashing too much. Or yeah, what do you reckon, Ken?
Absolutely. I remember when I was coaching Carly Cotterman, she won a world championship under 23 in 2008. And she had, when I started coaching, she squared up with one side different from the other, which I couldn't really fathom. And so we fixed that. But then I swear she squared up as the blade went into the water. It'd come along and it'd be squaring up like this as it went in. It was just at the last minute. And I tried to change it earlier and I gave up because I couldn't. But it clearly worked. But I think the critical step really is to, I prefer late because there is some wind resistance, but again, it depends a little bit why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you enjoy rowing and you like the rhythmic motion of it, and the water's not really bad, I'd square up early because you're less likely to get grief out of that. But as far as should you square up early or late, I'd have to say I prefer late. But when I'm coaching athletes, particularly novice athletes, I'd make it really early, simply because there's less time for grief. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, when you get quite good at it, you know that pattern, you know the square up, you know the place, you know the lift with the arms, and you can do it very quickly right at the end of the stroke. If you're learning, you probably need to separate it out. As you said, passing the knees isn't too bad for a beginner, but it's really just so that they can learn the movement and get themselves in the right spot. If you're more experienced, I'd go with whatever feels most natural. And if you're rowing with a crew, go with whatever the person in front of you is doing, because that's far more important than having a early or a late square up is to fit in.
Nice.
Thank you.
How about drills or workouts to do on the water in singles without a stroke coach that develops skills, provides a decent workout, and potentially creative ideas for working out in pairs in singles together?
What do you mean by pairs in singles?
So like two folks going out in independent singles, but doing drills together or doing things together that are creative ideas that provide a decent workout. And I believe this is Meredith's question. So Meredith, if you have any clarification on that, please do chime in.
Oh, well, I think it was, that just came from rowing with, a team, and now we're all in singles.
Yeah.
And we often go out just, 2, 3, 4 of us together. And so it's just some creative ideas to, push each other or to still work together, but we're in separate boats.
I think the worst thing about rowing a single, like when I used to row crew boats at school, that was great. I wanted to be a bit more competitive, so I started rowing a single. And most people who do this hate it because, it's all on you. You're by yourself. You can't sort of bridge that gap between working together in a team, which rowing is all about, as opposed to working with yourself. So when it comes to drills and things, if you're doing it for enjoyment, you can do whatever you like and both try and see how many strokes you can take off the water or something like that. But in a single, you're all about your own technique and what you need to do to make the boat faster. It'd be different or more enjoyable for yourself. So you really have to take it upon yourself. Even if you're rowing with a coach is coaching you, you still have to control what you're doing in the single. And so you want to do exercises that are your weak points, for example, or something you want to improve on. You could both focus on your own things. The single's also very hard if you're trying to work out in a certain zone to row with someone else, because everyone's a different fitness. So they're probably going really easy and you're pretty much blowing up. That's quite common in a single. So it is a difficult sport to do with other people just because you're not in the same boat. There's a lot of issues with that. But I think as long as you're out there and you're both trying to achieve different, the same sort of thing, whether it be have fun or train hard, you'll be fine going rowing with someone else. And you can do whatever you like, but it's one of those things where you sort of have to change your focus from working with someone to working on yourself. And I think the single is one of the most rewarding boats in that regard, because it's all on you if you have a good row or a bad row. I used to hate that in the single, but now I think it's my favorite boat because I know exactly, it's very enjoyable knowing what you're going to get and what you can produce.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things you can do that can improve your speed. If you've got a stroke coach, then what we'd commonly do is we'd have everyone with a stroke coach and we'd put them on a particular rate, and we'd know, coaching wise, we'd know who's faster than others, and we'd stagger the start and get them to do a piece for a period of time. and that gives people something to chase, and the ones that are in front, they try and hold off the ones behind. So you can do that sort of thing. But without a stroke coach, it's a little bit more difficult. The easiest way to do it, if I just picture two people, but you can do it with a larger number, if you make sure that someone is in front of the other deliberately. So let's say that there's Meredith and Jessica out there going for a row, and if we put Jessica further back than Meredith, and then what Meredith has to do, as long as people trust each other, of course, is Meredith can copy Jessica's rate. And so the answer would be to copy Jessica's rate, because you can see it, and Jessica can't see you though, so that's why there's this honesty git.
Oh.
But anyway, so copy her rate and then try and make yourself faster.
Yeah.
Now, the way I'd suggest you do that from a drill perspective would be to say, well, what can I do to improve my rowing stroke? Now, Jessica's going along and she's just rowing along as how she wants to and working on what her bits are. And then Meredith, if you're in front, then you can then work out what works for you and what doesn't by experimenting with things and seeing how that affects your distance. For example, you might say, well, okay, I'm going to be really focused on my catch and see if I can get my catch better and see what that does. And if you get it right, then you'll find that all of a sudden you're going away from Jessica without actually trying any harder. And so that's a valuable lesson to learn. And you can do other things too. And you know, of course, both of you can do the same thing and then swap it around. But you can do that in a group. If you had 6 out there together, then just make sure that 5 of them are in front of someone, and the pace boat, the person at the back, they just row along at a constant pace if they possibly can and not try anything too cute, and then everyone else tries to improve themselves against that base rate. The critical thing really with all of this is if you put the blade in and you put it in well at the catch and it's well connected and you hold it in there until you're finished and you take it out of the water, then you're probably doing pretty well. And if you get to the end of a race and you're exhausted, then there's probably not much else you could do. Now, I know that's a shocking thing to say because you could have your body doing all sorts of weird things on the way through. But when you're out practicing like that with a pace boat behind you, then you can focus on the catch and do the same part of the catch, focus on a particular aspect. Or you can say, I'm going to square early or late, and you may find it makes no difference or it does make a difference. So that's the way I'd suggest to approach that. And you probably get quite a bit of enjoyment out of that, especially if you swap it around a little bit, because then it becomes a bit of an entertaining competition.
Nice. Cool. So I wanted to ask Pat Trione. Hi, Pat. This was actually her question that she sent in, and chime in, Pat, if you want to add to it or change it. But is there a way to chat about and demonstrate how to achieve the feeling of placing the blade before you push without the use of the swingulator? Any other ideas? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a bit like I was talking before, but swingulator it's only a bit useful for that because you have to actually, you can't practice this by yourself. You need to have someone pushing on the end of the oar to make it, to pretend they're the water. But when you're in a boat, it's the best way to do it, I think, really is, as I said before, is to have someone balance the boat or do it yourself. You could do it in a single quite well, is to just come into the catch, put the blade in, and leaving your body in the same position, just let the oar push you down the water, down the slide rather. And I'd practice that, and then I'd suggest try to put the blade in quickly. Most people don't put the blade in quickly. And the reason why I think it's hard to do is because we tend to ask people to come into the catch not too fast. Now, I'm a believer in pulling the boat towards you, but even then, it's still, you're coming into the catch not very fast. It's a slow sort of movement compared to the catch. And then you want to put the catch in really super quick, like super quick, 0.1 of a second or less. It's in the water. And then you want to pick up the load relatively gently. So that's, again, a slow movement. So if you think about what we're asking people to do, is we're asking them to come into the catch relatively slowly, then put the blade in really quickly, and then pick up the load reasonably gently, and then accelerate away from, sort of as Lachlan just said before, 0 up to 100. And we want that change from doing a slow movement to a fast movement to a slow movement, and that's less than a second. It's about 1/4 of a second we want to change the speed. And so the thing to learn really is that it's not all one speed. You don't come into the catch, put the blade in, and come out of the catch at the same speed. You come into the catch and come out of the catch not too different in speed compared to the catch, but in the middle you've got this really quick movement, super quick movement. And so you need in your mind to educate your body to say that I'm doing a slow movement, a fast movement, and a slow movement. And often that's the hardest thing to get a grip on. And so I'd suggest practice that speed at the catch. If you can, I'd suggest come in, if you've got a balanced boat, come into the catch and just practice putting the blade in. And you'll be surprised how quickly you can put it in. And some people say that if you drop the blade in, it goes in under its own weight, and that's as quick as it gets. That's just not true. I did a video with Joel some time back, you may have seen, that where I got him to drop it. And if you dropped it from a height of about 2 feet above the water, yes, it went in about as quickly as he could put it in if he tried. But then he would have had his blade 2 feet in the air when he came into the catch, and none of us want that. So if you want to put the blade in quickly, you've got to put it in. And I'd suggest practice putting it in quickly, and then remembering it's a quick movement and separate it from the slow movements in your mind. And I think that's the best way to get it understood. Hope that answers the question.
I'd go for so when I'm I think it's easier to do in a sculling boat than in a sweep boat. Sweep boat, you've got this big oar, and you sort of have to, you know, like it hasn't got a lot of feeling in it. Whereas in a sculling boat, you've got 2 lighter oars, and you can really feel it. You want to have a nice light grip going into the catch, so nice and light. So you're going to be feeling everything as you place it, and as you go out to the catch, you know, you sort of place the blade in the water, and it's really a timing thing. But you can place then push. It's you can separate the two movements out. So you really want to be feeling for that place. You can sort of feel the bubbles. Like, it's a difficult feeling. It's difficult to explain sometimes, but you can feel as you get a quick catch, the blade dropping into the water. Maybe if you're at the pontoon, you can sort of like drop the blade into the water and sort of feel that sort of feeling. And then if you have light fingers at the catch and not gripping it too hard, you really can start to feel that catch, as opposed to just sort of tensely putting it in. You can't feel what you're doing with your hands at all. So yeah, try and think about it relatively light and feel the sensation of when the blade actually goes in the water. For me, it feels sort of like some bubbles, and yeah, it's difficult to explain. But if you do practice and feel for it, and not think about, I need to get the blade in quickly and then push. It's more, I need to place it at the right time, and I'm going to do that and feel it in the hands. Really look for that feeling, as opposed to just trying to get it in quick and muscle it and things like that. So, yeah.
That's good. I also just wanted to add, Bob suggested also leapfrogging can be a good fun drill to do with 2 singles or more than 2 singles. So regarding the question.
You could do bump racing as well. If you have a single you don't mind running into someone else.
We really didn't just say that, Ned. So how about any dry land workouts on the erg, or strength training, cross training for masters? Any suggestions there that you?
I think probably the most critical thing is the core again. I think the core is really important, and often masters, I'm 60 something, so masters tend to have a little bit more weight around the waist. I don't row though. You're right about that. I haven't got time to row. I'm too busy. And so I think core strength is one of those super important things for masters to do. The other thing that's something that we've been focusing on a little bit more lately is that if there are people that are racing, then everyone who races pulls the boat towards them at the catch. If you look at the acceleration curve on the Rowing in Motion app, then there's this, if they're going at a rate, they've got to pull the boat towards them because they won't achieve the rate otherwise. And so you get this increase in acceleration just before the catch. So one of the things about that is that if you think about it, when you're pulling the boat towards you, you're pulling it with muscles that you don't really use very much. When we're standing, walking, none of those movements really involve pulling your legs towards you. Maybe lifting your leg up does a bit, but there's not a lot of training of that. And so you can practice that on an erg. And one thing we experimented with recently that seemed to do the trick with this is to put a piece of wood under the front of the erg so that it's on an uphill angle. If it's on sliders, that's probably more difficult. But if it's just a fixed erg, then you then have to practice pulling yourself up. So that'll pull yourself into the catch, which I think will improve those muscles, because in a race you use them a lot, and when you're training and rowing at a low rate, you don't use them at all. Mm-hmm. So other than that, though, on an ergo, I think the critical things to do is to focus on the on posture and the quick catch. Now, when you're doing a catch on an ergo, it's really easy to do it slowly because it's just a steady row. It's not really a problem. But what you want to do is you want to have a really quick start of the catch, so you really get a hold of the chain. And with a flywheel, if you're teaching people to do this on an erg, then you can actually get you can do the whole stroke on an erg without engaging the flywheel at all if you do it slowly. And so what I think a good technique drill for people on an ergo for any age group is that to understand that you need to pick up the flywheel right at the start. So it's got to be that really quick movement to get the flywheel. You don't have to accelerate all the way, like then go really hard after that. You can take your time on the slide, but you've got to get connected. Mm-hmm. And so the way to emphasize that is to ask the athlete to sit on the ergo at the catch position and then go all the way down the slide without engaging the flywheel at all. So they understand the concept that the flywheel, you've got to have a quick movement to get it caught. Otherwise you can row all day and you won't catch it at all. And then ask them to really catch that first little bit, probably with 1 foot out and 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot in the ergo, 1 on the ground, and just practice picking up the flywheel. And you'll find they get a much better ergo times out of that, and they're using the ergo to the fullest extent. Cool. But the critical thing really is posturing. Make sure the pelvis is vertical, make sure the rock over is correct, soft knees as they come off the finish, just those sort of things. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. So we just have there's one more, it's on nutrition, but I wanted to open it up to see if anybody had any questions here that you'd like to just unmute yourself and ask. As we're kind of getting to the end here.
Yeah, I have just one. The thing about accelerating into the front end, Gordon Hamilton has advised us to go to the front by pressing outward, working into the blade. So pressing out with the bottom of the fingers into the oarlock, and using that rather than pulling ourselves up with the feet, because he says we'll maintain better stability that way. So just a detail, but I'm interested in your thoughts.
No, I'm a real fan of pushing yourself into the catch, because if you're it's harder in a sweep boat, but if you're in a sculling boat and you push it outward against the blade, you can push yourself into the catch without putting any adverse pressure on the boat, because all of the forces are contained within the boat. And you also, by doing that, you put weight onto the foot plate. Now, I like having weight on the foot plate, because then when you change direction at the catch and you start to push, then you're already there and you don't have to actually do so much with the lower legs. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really good especially in a steady state rowing. It's harder to do at a race pace. The issue that I see is that at race pace, you really can't rate highly unless you do pull the boat towards you to some extent. And hence we get that. I've never seen a acceleration curve of a racing boat that doesn't have that bump just before the catch, that increase in acceleration. Mm-hmm. And that's caused by that pulling it in the boat towards you into the catch. So I think at racing you can't avoid it. However, I think it's really handy, especially in teaching beginners, to have them put outward pressure on the blades as they come into the front, because then when they get to the catch, there's less for them to do. All they have to do is, because they're already pushing a little bit with their feet because it's balanced against the gates, when they get to the catch, all they've got to do is lift their hands up and push a bit harder. And so it simplifies the catch. So I think it's a great drill for simplifying the catch. But I think you'll find at race pace, every boat has that acceleration just before the catch, which has to be people pulling the boat towards them, which means that you can't really be pushing on the foot stretcher, otherwise you wouldn't get that sensation. So I don't think you can avoid it in a race situation.
Okay, that's what Drew Ginn used to talk about. You know, what makes it go faster is all that.
Yeah, and Drew's a bit of a fan of it. I think most coaches are, particularly the Australian men's crew at the moment, they're very much in that mode, and they tend to pause at the finish and then pull the boat towards them and into the catch and come in at a constant rate. The only trouble with pulling the boat towards you, if you're talking about novice crews, is that you have to have a good catch. if you pull the boat towards you and you don't have a good catch, then you're going to lose that by pushing the boat backwards as soon as you start to put the blade in the water.
Right there, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm a bit anti-young or novice rowers trying to be really aggressive about pulling the boat in and putting the blade in the water, because they've got to have such a good well-timed catch to be able to get away with that.
Yeah,
and it troubles me a bit when you see school-age athletes trying to copy elite crews, because there's a different skill set altogether. And Drew Gin was pretty good at pulling the boat towards him and putting the blade in. Yep, no doubt at all. But young Johnny, who just started rowing, he's not good at that at all. So I just use them both, I think, is the answer.
Thank you.
The thing I'd say about the pushing out with the handles into the oar locks, your shoulders are the things that are going to be doing most of that pushing, and they're not very strong. If you try and do that a lot and not rely on your legs at all, they'll fatigue very quickly. So the easiest way to get up and down the slide is obviously with the legs. But I think it's important to be connected to the boat, and having that thought of pushing out with the shoulders is going to give you that connection and help with your balance. So I reckon that's where he's coming from with that one.
Right.
It makes a big difference to balance. If you've got that outward pressure there, then really what you're doing by that is you've made the boat from being 1 foot wide to being 5 feet wide.
Right.
And that's a much easier balance thing. Good for beginners, absolutely.
Cool. Somebody asked, one of the members asked about nutrition tips. I wasn't sure if you wanted to take a stab at that, or a general question.
Yeah, the general. Yeah.
Generally, there's a lot of
really,
approaches to nutrition.
Absolutely.
A lot.
I had an athlete once that ate a meat pie before the race.
Yeah.
And he was really sick. And I said, "Did you learn something, Will?" And he said, "I certainly did." So I think the critical step is, if it's in a racing type perspective, then clearly make sure you're well fueled and a long time before the race, a couple of hours, 3 hours, that type of thing, I think is worth the exercise. The critical thing really, if you want to row fast, is to not have any surplus weight, really. But having said that, you are what you are. And I had an occasion with Carly again, who was won a world championship, and the year after they tried to make her stronger. She only weighed 55 kilos, and they thought, we'll beef her up a bit. And so they put her on a heavy weightlifting type regime and made her slower, because she wasn't as flexible as she was before. It wasn't her natural body weight. So I think there's a lot to be said for maintaining your natural weight and don't try and vary it enormously. Sure, yeah, I'm overweight. If I had less weight on me, then I'd feel fitter and I'd be able to do things faster. But to try and change it hugely change your body shape, essentially, you want to do that with real care. As far as nutrition goes, though, I'm very flexible on that now. I used to be more I'm not a vegetarian, okay? Lachlan's a vegan. Lachlan's partner is a vegan, and she represented Australia last year, the year before, in the ultra marathon. And so I think there's a lot more leeway in nutrition than we used to think. There was this concept, you had to have this balanced diet, you had to have meat, you had to have, all that sort of stuff. And what I've seen with Lachlan and Jess, where they're vegans, and Jess runs, she does, her favourite distance, I think, is about 50 kilometres as a run. Wow. And she doesn't run out of energy. And so I think that it's, dare I say it, overrated to some extent. Balanced diet, sure, go for that. But beyond that, I don't think it's that big an issue, other than around race time. Nutrition at race time, hydration's important, all those sort of usual things. So.
Yeah, as far as nutrition with me, I think the main thing I think about is not eating 3 hours before a race. One of my coaches, Glenn Myler, he represented Australia ages ago. He said that, whatever time your race is, get up 3 hours before and eat. Like, if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, then do that. But I think that's very good advice. It's because, especially when you're nervous, it takes you like at least another hour to process what you're meant to be processing. So that's definitely saved me a lot. And yeah, as far as nutrition, there's a million things out there, and everyone's got their own way. I'm reading a book at the moment about people who, just have like a keto diet, and they just eat, basically animal fat and nothing else, and they can do amazing things. And then vegans can do it as well, and God knows who else can do it as well. So, let's just say who knows really. But I'd say for me personally, with my rowing, if I ever develop a stomach that's enough to compromise my catch position, I know about it. So as rowing's pretty forgiving, most people think that you move up and down in the boat like on an ergo, like a fixed ergo, but you're actually moving the boat more than anything else. It's only a 14 kilo weight. It's not for me, 100 kilo weight. So the weight doesn't have as much impact in rowing as it does with a lot of other sports, because you're moving the boat and oars around you, as opposed to on an ergo where you so on a fixed erg, I hate fixed ergs because I have to move 100 kilos up and down the erg. It basically feels terrible compared to rowing on sliders or in the boat. So I pretty much never row a fixed erg unless I have to, just because I don't like the way it loads up my back and things like that. So yeah, I reckon as long as your gut's not getting in the way of a good rowing stroke, I think you're probably okay. But it's obviously if you're a bit lighter, you'll be faster. When I was in grade 10, I did I think it was like a 6:43 2K or something like that, and that was pretty good. And then the next year I'd probably lost about 7 or 8 kilos, so I was thinking I'd be faster. I did 6:55 or something. It was terrible. I didn't have enough go. Like my body was probably breaking down. I looked good, but it wasn't particularly fast or good for my rowing. So there's lots of ways you can cut it. Just don't go too extreme probably with weight, and sit at whatever your body naturally sits at, and you'll probably enjoy yourself a lot more than if you try and go to the extreme.
Were you going to say something else, Ken? Or?
Oh, no, just going to add, not really on the nutrition side, but if you want to row for fun or for speed, then don't be too hung up on things like the height of your foot stretcher. And so you hear people saying you should have your feet high because you're going to get better angle for physics. It makes sense to have them high. But the reality is that if you can't get to the right position comfortably, don't do it. Change the boat so it fits. And it's all very well to say we should get more flexible and get more flexible. And yes, you can do that and that helps. But the reality is if you're doing it for fun, make it fun. Make the boat so it fits. And a study in England last year, the year before, found that the loss of speed by having your foot stretcher low was compensated for. If it was a more comfortable position, you were better off to put it low because it reduced the load on your lower back and you got better performance. So make sure you're comfy. If you're not comfy, rig it so you are.
Yeah, don't be afraid to do something a little outlandish. Like I've got my Wintec seat on the highest setting it will go, and then I've got about probably an inch extra. I got some longer screws, took the base off, so now I sit an extra inch higher. My feet are at their lowest position. They're really flat. My heels actually, if I was to put my heels down, would touch the bottom of the boat. So I put a little bit of tape there to stop it from wearing. But I tend to row a lot on my toes anyway, and that's comfortable. So I reckon if you've got a single, don't be afraid to just modify it like crazy just because, it's a lot more enjoyable. I hate it when I get into a boat, my feet are too high, the seat's too low. I can't get out to the catch. It's just terrible. I can't stand it. And I really hate it when people, especially in clubs and things like that, or even, there's lots of senior coaches that will recommend just putting everyone rows on the same settings. And yes, that's easy, but that's not a world I want to row in, basically. So, I really would spend the time, if you can, to customize your seat in the boat, whether it be a single or in a crew boat, if it's possible. If not, then I guess you can get some seat pads and bits and pieces to try and make it a bit more enjoyable. But I reckon it's one of those things where it really pays to know your measurements. All the boats look different. If you can get a tape measure and say my seat to feet height is going to be 23 centimeters every single time, you can just get up to a boat and you'll know if it's going to fit or not. for me, it's extremely important to having a good row. And I'd budget time either side of my session if I knew I had to change stuff and change it back, because it's that important to me.
Makes sense. Cool. Any other questions from folks, or?
Yeah. Okay. There are so many YouTubes of wonderful rowers. Are there some that you have are go-to ones that you like to show your people that you're working with as really good models of the rowing stroke?
Yeah, that's pretty tough, actually.
Sometimes the rowers will look like another rower, so they'll have a specific rowing technique, and so you could probably class rowers into 20 different styles. That it's that diverse. People. My coach reckons I row like Angel from Cuba, and so if I have a look at his technique, I can see similarities with mine. When it comes to a single scull, there's basically as many winning techniques as there are athletes. So, some things are important and some things aren't. And like getting a good catch, important, 100%. Being able to be fit enough to drive it through to the finish and tap the blade out, that's it. Whatever else you do, probably, it's your style. One of my coaches says, well, you get good length, but I get it all in my body and my reach. I don't get it with my seat packing up to the catch. And he's like, well, you could do a heap of stretching and this and that, but you move the boat pretty well, and that's probably what you row like. Not to say you shouldn't bother trying to change things with your technique, but it's very hard to sort of apply one person's technique to someone else if they don't row the same way. If they happen to row almost identically and you say, well, why don't we try and row a bit more like this successful person, then great. But yeah, the more and more I've spent in the sport, I think that technique is one thing, but fitness is almost everything. Like if you're strong and fit and you have an okay technique, like relatively good, you'll probably win. It's not very often that you have someone with a perfect technique. Yeah, and be able to push yourself, and that sort of thing in a race. So yeah, it's one of those things that there's just so many different techniques. I don't know if so sometimes it makes sense, like if you do notice someone's got something similar, but everyone has something that makes their boat go fast at a high level. And if you can try and work out what that is, and if it's something similar to how you row, then you've got a shot at trying to emulate it. If not, you might be barking up the wrong tree. A lot of people, will look at Mahe Drysdale's catch or his blade depth and be like, that wouldn't work with a normal person because Mahe is an exceptional athlete, and that might be true, and it might not. It's hearsay. Really.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of. I suppose if I had an athlete that I would like to emulate in my coaching, it'd probably be Kim Crow, who won at Rio. But I don't think that's necessarily parochialism. I'm a bit of a fan of Lyle McCarthy, who coached us, and we get on pretty well. So I think that's the way I tend to like my athletes to row. Having said that, I remember watching in Rio. I wasn't there, but remotely. And I think in one race, Kim came first and Emma, I've forgotten her other name, American lady. I think it's Emma. Anyway, she came second, I think it was.
Chevy Stone? Was it Chevy Stone?
No, I don't think so.
Chevy Stone.
Chevy Stone.
Anyway, okay, could be, yeah. And I may have the wrong athlete, so forgive me if I have. But Kim Brennan tends to get connected with it and put the load on, then open up a body relatively early in the stroke and drive it right through. And the athlete that came second was all legs at the catch and then opened their body late. Now, I prefer the earlier style, but let's not mince it here. These were first and second in a world race. And so which one's right? I don't know. The other thing I think is really important to note is that if you're in a crew boat, getting together is so important. Joel, whom you mentioned before, the Finnish guy that I'm helping with, he was rowing a single, and then 2 weeks ago he started rowing in a double with, I Ollie, I can't pronounce his surname, Kapanen, who's history of rowing in Finland, his family. But when they went into a double scull, then their techniques were different. And so then, but 2 weeks later, they won the Finnish World Championship, the Finnish Championship by, I don't know, hundreds of meters, and they're off to the European World Championships, which is great. But when we started out 2 weeks ago, their angles were different. The way they used their body was different. And the critical thing is making them match. And so we got them to match angles with rigging. And then we got Joel, who's in the bow seat, to make sure he followed Ollie more carefully, like Lachlan was saying before, and matched his style and tried to match when the power was on. And that's what made a fast boat. And so an interesting thing came out of that, though, is that Joel's, I think, 188 centimetres high, something like that. And Ollie is about 12 centimetres taller. Big difference between these two. But when you look at them carefully, their arms are the same length. And so when you're trying to get people to match up in a boat, you want the athletes to try hard to match, but sometimes you just physically can't do it. And what happened is that the catch for Joel was much greater than the catch for Ollie, the angle, because we made the assumption that Ollie's taller, therefore we gave him a greater spread. So we put his heels on 161.5 and we had Joel on 159.5 or something like that. And the reality is their arms were the same. And so we had to put them on the same spread. And once we did that, then all of a sudden it matched. So I think the critical step, as Lachlan says, is get the athletes to match each other in the boat, and that'll make it go fast, both in a rigging perspective, and don't assume that big people are different. If Lachlan summed it up for me the other day, we were talking about, what was it, Lachlan? If someone in the boat's got they're all in the water for longer, what was it?
If the shorter person should never have an arc greater than the taller person. Never. They could be the same, or the taller person could have a greater arc. But if it's the other way around, you've really got a problem.
Change your boat. Just move the span. Just shorten the oars, tighten, lengthen them out, whatever.
I think the most important thing out of that anecdote is you didn't know until you looked at the angles when they were actually rowing. That was the only way that you found this problem. And how many people do that? Not many. They might eyeball it. It's okay, but you know.
It's really interesting what a difference in perception can make and understanding if you put it at a 60th of a second per frame. Yeah. If you're slower, because I know people say, I can look at that row and he's rowing pretty well. I guarantee if I slow it down to 60 frames a second, look at it frame by frame, there's all sorts of stuff that we want to deal with. So, and if you can, watch them from above. Get them to row under a bridge. If you've got a drone, put it up there, have a look. And you'll find it's amazing the things you can see from that different angle.
Yeah, and, so it's like rowing in 3 dimensions instead of 2, which we do, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And how does the thing that really struck me was how the blade goes into the water. And if you look at it from outside, from the same plane as the boat, so you're sitting in a speedboat next to it or on the bank, you'd swear the blade goes in and drops straight in the water. It doesn't. It doesn't do that at all. And so when we put Randall foils on top of the blade, so it's got this bit of plastic along the top, you'd think, well, that'll make it harder to put the blade in and harder to get it out. But the blade doesn't go down and doesn't come up. It goes in and it comes out. And so it changes, as Lachlan said when I did that video, he said it changes how you think about the catch. It's a different part of the stroke. I think the trick really, the most fundamental thing overall is learn and understand and ask and pick anyone's brain you can and just understand what we're doing, I think, as rowers. And I think that's how you get the best outcome. And a camera can turn, like a camera at 60 frames a second or even higher, can turn a good coach into an excellent coach. Excellent coaches can pick things by eye. They can see things, they get a feeling for it. But if you can slow it down and analyze it and you know a bit about it, you can be a great coach or a great analyst of what's happening. And so it's really ubiquitous technology that is extremely powerful when it comes to teaching and learning rowing.
Right.
Even teaching yourself.
Yeah, especially teaching yourself.
Sounds good. Well, any other last questions out here? I'm sure I'm expressing what everybody else is thinking, but it's just been, well, actually, let me ask you, Ken and Lachlan, if you have any last bits that you'd like to share related to your website or anything that could be helpful for folks, or that you, yeah.
I mean, we have we put some fair bit of free stuff out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're familiar with any of those platforms, you can subscribe to see what videos we're putting out. We also have an email list, so if you sign up for a free membership, you just put your email in. I'll add you to our email list, and you can see what we've done recently. We also have paid memberships, with all our library of 850 plus videos that you can join up to. We also have group memberships, so your whole club could join up and pay a lesser rate sort of thing. But yeah, I think one thing I'd say with rowing is there's some things that really matter with your rowing to make you faster and make it more enjoyable, and there's some things that really don't. And working out those things for you, I think, is very important. And don't try and necessarily change something about your technique without knowing why you're changing it. You might as well not bother. There's no point just looking at a video and saying, oh, well, he's said that and row like that, then I'm going to try it, unless you understand why you want to do that. I think it's very important. Just sort of treat yourself a bit like a company or something. You really have to work out what you want and what's relevant to you when it comes to information. And I'd always ask people questions like, coaches will often just wander about and look at people rowing and not say anything. They're thinking something, but they're not saying it. Just call them over and say, what did you see? And then they'll be looking next time, especially with more experienced coaches, state coaches and things like that. They're just people, and they're typically looking at your rowing stroke and working something out to themselves, and they might as well share it with you. If you just ask them, they'll tell you. And just sort of be inquisitive about why you do things a certain way, because that's how you'll work out if you want to change it, or if you need to know more about it, or whatever. But yeah, I think there's on our website and on the internet in general, there's a sort of an overwhelming amount of information. And I just sort of like pull out it like a thread or something. If you're interested in a certain area, just sort of learn a bit more, and just try and take it step by step. And a few years later, you'll know a lot. And
I think one of the critical things too that I've seen change, certainly in my experience, it's changed in recent times, or in the last 10 years, is that if anyone thinks that they know how to row properly, then they're probably wrong, because there's all sorts of different ways to do this. Yeah, and so what it is that there was a time, and it still happens somewhere, I'm sure, where coaches won't share, they won't discuss, they won't share their ideas, and clearly we don't agree with that at all, because we're keen to share any idea we can get, because that knowledge makes everyone better. And so what happens these days, I find mostly with coaches, they're only too happy to talk about it because they enjoy it. You talk to Brett Crow, who's coached at an international level for years, and he'll talk about it all day. But he'll also see something and not say anything because he doesn't want to offend, or doesn't, that way that people are naturally. And so, but you'll find that if you ask a coach a question, then they'll almost always be happy to talk about it. And if they say something and you don't agree with it, then say to them, what about, I don't really understand. That's different from what I learned before, try it again. You'll find often they're saying the same thing, it's just in a different way. And so I think the critical thing really about able to row well and have fun rowing is to understand as best you can why you're doing it, what makes the boat move, what makes you feel comfortable, all those things, and then massage them together. And particularly, I'd say the best way to do this is to understand, really important, and then video yourself, or get someone to video you with a good quality camera. Most phones have got a good quality camera in it, and then slow it down and just understand what the differences are, why it works. And if you get any questions, we'd love to have them, because we want to make sure that we've got any bit of information people want to know about rowing on the website. And alternate views are fine. We don't have a problem with alternate views because, as I said before, we're not necessarily the people who know everything. It's really about just sharing what everyone knows, and then each person can take out of it what they want to take out of it. So happy to have questions. Absolutely, just email them in. So
sounds wonderful. Sounds really wonderful. Cool. Anything else from anybody else, or? I did want to share. I'm not sure if you saw the email, Lachlan and Ken, but Chris Chase is really interested in having you folks on for US Rowing webinar. I don't know if you saw that.
okay, cool.
Yeah, sounds
I
good.
did see that thing.
Sent the contact info. That was there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get onto that.
He does some really great. I mean, he's a great guy, and I think you'll enjoy the experience.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here, and unless there's anything left, we could go on and talk forever about this stuff. But I will post. I'll get this video out, and if you'd like, I'll share the link with you, if you'd like.
Cool, thanks.
And then also,
thank you.
I will also post on our members email site, just if anybody has any questions and such, to go ahead and send them your way, because that's just lovely, that opportunity.
No problem.
Yeah.
No, it's, from my perspective, it's been fun. So I'm happy to do it again. Do it for anyone. No problem at all.
Okay. We might take you up on it, Ken.
Yeah, do that. Do that.
It's been a pleasure to be invited. Yeah, it's great to talk about, you know, what we spend. You know, Ken and I are normally talking to each other, you know, every day about some rowing thing or another, like 40-minute conversations just in the middle of Ken's work day. And yeah, it's nice to be able to sort of share an interest with people who have similar sort of thoughts about, you know, what you're looking to get out of your sport, and, you know, search for knowledge and all of that. So yeah,
we really appreciate what you guys are doing. I mean, the accessibility that you're creating to rowing is, I just think, is just wonderful. So yeah.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Cool.
Well, hope everybody has a great night, and we'll see you later. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.